Hello and welcome to Tips for EMS Training Volume 1. This is Sean Halsman, paramedic and education guy. This is a training that is being put together as one of many volumes that I hope to appear in the future, designed specifically for Twin City Ambulance Field Training Officers, but there are educational concepts within this presentation that I hope will be useful to any agency or anybody who's interested in training in EMS. So by all means, please use this stuff if you find it interesting, and don't if you don't. We're going to go over, in this volume, 4 tips to training, and this is a basic overview of some of the very rudimentary ideas in training. We have people in our ranks who have been training for a long time. We have people who have just begun training. And I wanted to make sure that everybody has an understanding of some finer concepts so we can collectively improve our training department and make sure that our new hires are getting what they need. So, first things first, let's outline the training objectives. They're actually very simple. When we're bringing new hires into our company, there's 2 things we want them to do. 1 is to meet what we call minimum competence, and 2, to meet all training benchmarks. So let's talk about minimum competence first. That kind of sounds like a lowball term, and I understand that. However, it's not a lowball term. What we're basically doing is setting a line in the sand and saying, this is what we need you to do at minimum to be able to succeed as an employee here at Twin City Ambulance. You will hopefully improve over time, but this is where we need you to be before we put you online. There are 6 core criteria that are set forth for training, and they are in the binders that are given to the new hires, and they'll also be in your training guidebooks. And they are safe driving, navigation, patient movement and lifting, radio procedures, EMS skills appropriate for level of care, and paramedic or ALS assist. Each one of these 6 core criteria has in the binder bullet points listed which set forth what is competence. So at any point, your trainee or you can review the core criteria and look at the bullet points and see if they're doing all those things. And if they're not, they need to improve in those specific areas. So before we put anybody online and clear them, they will meet minimum competence and be able to perform the job at least a minimum level. The second is the benchmarks, and the benchmarks really are check-offs in the training binder of various skills and situations that the candidate or trainee should be familiar with and be able to navigate well. So you will check them off as an FTO, and the candidate will initial them that they have done those things. And this is just a written verification that the trainee has been exposed to those concepts and has shown that they can do it at least once in the proper fashion. Conclusion to all this is that we're not looking for perfection. We can keep somebody in training for 2 or 3 years and still not have them be perfect and not have them encounter every possible scenario in the EMS world, and I think we know that at this point. So we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for new hires to meet minimum competence levels, and that will get them out on the streets, and they are definitely going to learn on the job. This is learn on the job career. Remember your own beginnings and your own training. This is not something that you learned overnight. You took some time in the field and made some mistakes before you got to where you are today. Here's a little chart, because I like charts. It makes everything look much smarter. So we talk about training over time and the performance in EMS over time for an individual employee. What we're looking for in our training of a new hire is something like this. So the new hire comes in and over time gets trained. They reach a level of minimum competence, or at least that level, and maybe go a little higher, and then training ends and they go out in the field. Notice there's a dip here. Right? That dip is expected. You've had somebody under your wing, they've been working and they're comfortable working with you, and you're good to go with clearing them. You clear them, they go on to their first shift, they're by themselves for the first time, nerves set in, and they'll make a few mistakes. So we expect to see a little bit of a decline just after clearing, but usually that's going to rectify itself and they'll right the ship and move on. So be aware of this and just expect that they're going to have a little bit of a regression when they clear training. And it'll take some time to move up there. So when you get criticism from your fellow employees about why did you clear this guy, we can say with confidence that they're okay, they're learning, and they're going to make some mistakes. Another scenario would be this. Somebody comes in from another company or another agency or with lots of experience, and they go through training starting at higher than minimum competence, and generally training would probably be shorter with somebody of that ilk. But again, once they leave your tutelage, they'll probably have some regression before they pick up and head on their way to superstardom or wherever they're going to go. The unfortunate situation that we get occasionally is that we have a trainee who just can't reach minimum competence, regardless of how much time and effort the FTOs put in. We always will give these people at least 2 FTOs to work with, just in case it's a personality issue. It also helps us to make sure that we're giving these people the best chance to succeed. But in the event that we can't get someone to minimum competence, we're going to eventually pop them out of training, and that's going to be a situation where we say, sorry, it's not working out. Why don't you reapply in 6 months, and we'll see if we can get you where you need to be at that point. Setting an example. This is really, really important, and I don't think I can overemphasize this. People are going to do much more of what they see on the job than what they hear from you. And remember that you have an FTO pin, and people know that you are a training person, and they understand that you have knowledge of what should be done in the field. However, these new employees are going to try to fit in socially, because the social aspect of this job is very, very important. Social aspect of most jobs is very important. So fitting in socially means kind of doing what everybody else does around you. If you are saying things to them but behaving in a way that's not consistent, they're going to not follow what you say. They're going to follow your behaviors. New employees are going to parrot the behavior and attitudes they see, regardless of what any of us tell them. That is really important to keep in mind, guys and girls, because your example is going to be what they come back with when we ask them, why did you do that? It's not going to matter that you told them they're supposed to inspect the ambulance. If you haven't done it, they won't do it. And that is where the expectations on FTOs are a little more of the standard employee, because you are setting the example both when you have an employee who's new and when you're working on your own. It's very hard to develop yourself as a person who should be listened to and trusted if you are not acting consistently all the time. This is a Venn diagram. You've seen these before in math. They're wonderful. All right? But your behaviors and decisions are basically a lot of choices that you're going to make on the job, and you're teaching new hires how to make those choices as well. I like to look at it as 4 fields of play here. All right. The first thing that is most important is what I'm doing good for my patient. So you're involved in a call, you're working in the field, and I think that probably the most important thing for us is what we're doing good for our patient. The next thing would be, is this good for Twin Cities image? I know it sounds like office space, is this good for the company? But we are running a business here, and we do have an image to upkeep. That image, by the way, was created by mostly the people who work in the field as you are, and the interactions they've had with our customers. So the Twin City image is not a branding thing that management is forcing out there. A Twin City image is a image that is created by the people on the streets, and we are just trying to direct that in a certain way. The next thing would be, is this good for EMS? Remember, sometimes people are going to call EMS once in their whole life, and they may not think Twin City when they think EMS, but they may just think paramedic or EMT. And if their one experience with a paramedic or EMT was bad or poor or unbecoming, that's going to make a mark on EMS as a whole. They may not remember the company name, but they'll know that the paramedics came and gave them a hard time. The last one is this good for me? This is the easiest place to be. So if we look at all these circles, ideally, with all the decisions that we make in the field, whether we're on a call or off a call, we want to be somewhere in the middle here with most of the things we do. We want Twin City to look good. We want our patients to be successful in getting where they need to go. We want EMS to look good, and theoretically, if it's good for you and you enjoy it, that's great. It's very easy to be in the circle of is this good for me and be anywhere else. For example, I am tired on my shift, and I'm going to go park in the parking lot underneath a lamp where everybody can see me, and I'm going to zonk out in the front of the ambulance. Is this good for me? Sure is. I'm getting a nap. All right. In this case, we don't have a patient, so it's not good for the patient. Is this good for Twin Cities image? Probably not. Most people in the world don't understand EMS, don't understand the nature of our job, and don't understand that it's acceptable for us to close our eyes and take a nap occasionally, especially on an overnight shift when there's a lot of downtime. It just looks to them as if we are sleeping on the job, which is not good for us, and actually it's not good for EMS. So when that happens, we're somewhere here in this circle. How can we get what's good for us and rectify that? Park someplace where people aren't going to see you. Very, very simple. You have to be very cognizant of these things nowadays because everyone's got a cell phone, everybody's got videos and pictures, and those types of situations will be photographed and turned into memes, which will go viral on the internet, and you'll be the star. So when you are working here, and especially when you have a new hire on, consider all of these factors. Try to get yourself somewhere in the middle. Is this good for the patient? Is it good for Twin Cities Image? Is this good for EMS? And if it's good for you too, that's awesome. So we'll get into the actual tips for training, and this is probably stuff that you've been doing. Hopefully you've been doing, but if it's not, then you'll learn a little bit here, and we can certainly discuss this one-on-one. If you ever want to come in and talk to me, I'm always open to discussing training. So tip 1, open communication. We need to be giving new hires and trainees feedback, both good and bad. They need to know when they're doing things well, and they need to know when they're not doing things well. If we don't communicate with them, they will never, ever be able to succeed in this field because we're just not giving them the opportunity to figure out what's happening. Combined with that feedback is not just the what, but also the why. So, for example, pull the stretcher out of the back of the ambulance and they let the wheels drop down very hard. We can say, we don't do that here at Twin City Ambulance. We don't let the wheels drop down very hard, and leave it at that. We've told them what, but it's not really giving them an explanation as of why, and because there's no why there, they may just think we're being nitpicky. So a better thing to do would be, we don't drop the wheels here at Twin City Ambulance because when you drop the wheels without lowering them down manually or slowly, you can actually break the wheels off. If we break the stretcher wheels off, then we can't fix it in the field. We have to call for another unit, which pulls another car to service and makes us look bad. So when we drop the wheels on the stretcher, we're going to drop them and lower them down gently. Explanations are huge, guys, so we need to be able to explain the things that we're doing. Don't just shoot rote rules at people without explaining why, because they need to understand the ins and outs of this. Understanding is the key to success. Look at this group of random letters here, okay? M-A-T-B, W, C, T, D, F, E, S, yada, 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 all right? If I tell you to memorize this in 1 minute, you think you can do it? Will you be able to reproduce this? If I start the timer right now and give you this for 1 minute, will you be able to reproduce it on a piece of paper as it stands there? Probably not, right? A lot of letters there, a lot of memorization. That group of letters might take you a day of writing it over and over again before you memorize it. All right. But how about if I explain this to you and I say that starting with the M, M is the first letter of Monday, first day of the week, and the letters following that are the days of the week in order, interspersed with the alphabet from A to G. So Monday, A, Tuesday, B, Wednesday, C, Thursday, D, Friday, E, Saturday, F, Sunday, G, and then it all starts over again. All right. Now that I've explained that to you in less than a minute, you'll be able to reproduce it at any time. So the understanding of what something is huge. Don't just tell somebody, tell them why. Documentation of feedback is also really, really important. There's a couple of things here. We don't ever want the new hire to question what's expected of them. And they will if we don't tell them. So if we're telling them that they're doing great and then suddenly they get pulled in the office because they're not, they're going to be surprised by that. We need them to know exactly what their weaknesses and strengths are, and we need to know that they know what the expectations are. The only way we do that is to document it after we talk to them and say that we had this discussion. We have to have a written record of our attempts to help the new hire succeed, both because it's the right thing to do, and down the road, if we get into a legal issue with somebody, we need a record to say that, look, we gave this person all the tools they needed, we gave them feedback on a timely and regular basis, and they still were not able to complete training, and then we are off the hook as far as liability. This is our job, to train, to bring them in, and give them everything we can to help them succeed, because we want them to be successful. We're spending time and money on these people, so we would like to do that. So open communication is important, and the documentation of that communication, we'll talk more about it later, but extremely important that we document things, which is why I harp on you guys over and over again to please get your reports in on time so we have written documentation of where these new hires are. Here's a rule. Nobody should ever be surprised in the unfortunate event that they do not make it through training. So when we sit down with somebody and say, I'm sorry, it's not working out, it should never be the first discussion we've had with them. There should be all sorts of documented discussions and meetings pointing out problems so we can say, we've had these meetings, we've had these discussions, you are not cutting it at this point, and we're going to have to let you go, unfortunately. Another rule. Everybody gets more than one chance to make a mistake. So other than deadly sins like stealing and deliberately damaging property, insubordination, harassing another employee, everyone gets a chance to make a mistake. We sit down with those people and say, this is a mistake, here is why. We document that we had that discussion. Hopefully the mistake won't happen again. Difficult conversations. I know many of you are like me and you don't like to have those difficult conversations. Unfortunately, you are involved in training, and training has expectations, and sometimes you have to approach people and tell them that they're not doing well. Things like you're doing something that is unsafe and needs to stop. I think most people are probably most comfortable having that conversation. So they're running hot and they run a red light. I think all of us would be able to turn to that person and say, I can't believe you just did that. However, it could be something else that they're doing. So having that discussion is extremely important. And sometimes it's very difficult to sit and talk to someone and say, hey, you're screwing it up here. You're not progressing and we need you to figure out why. So let's take a look at this. You've been in training for 2 weeks. You still haven't hit half your benchmarks. You're not doing well. What else can we do to help you? And the other thing is that we need to be able to tell people when they're not displaying behaviors that are consistent with Twin Cities values and the image of EMS. Now, think about how difficult that conversation is going to be when you've been screwing around and acting inappropriately for the last 2 days, and then you try to correct them. They're going to turn right back at you and say, well, that's exactly what you did. So going back to the concept of leading by example, this is a conversation you may have to have with somebody. We don't speak to fire departments and partners that way. We don't treat patients that way. We don't make comments like that in front of people. So the rules for this are try to find positives in any feedback. When you're giving feedback, it can be negative that you're not doing well, but try to find some positives because people do need to be built up a little bit. Document, again, all concerns and issues and the trainee's response. So it's not enough for you just to write down the trainee's not doing this. You need to write down the trainee's not doing this. We talked about it and she responded with ... So we have, again, a response from the trainee listed in documentation that we had a discussion and they understood the problem and they were able to respond to it. Second tip, learner engagement. Training and education is a partnership. The FTO has to provide information and feedback. So basically that is you demonstrating skills, explaining skills and concepts, coaching people through an operation or through a call or whatever. That's you providing information. But it can't just be one-sided. People don't just open up their heads and we pour information in. The trainee has to seek answers. They have to be engaged. They have to apply what they're being taught. They have to accept your feedback. They should be asking questions, listening to you, studying their binder, and they should be actively participating in calls and skills when appropriate. Don't be afraid to point this out to them and say, look, you're not participating in the calls and we need you to be involved. You're not doing what we've asked you to do. You're not studying your binder. That's important, and those people need to be talked to and they need to understand what is expected of them. Here's a rule. 50% of the time that you're not on call should be spent doing training of some kind. I don't expect that you're going to be 12 hours in your trainee's face. That's unrealistic. But about half the time that you're not on a call, you should be doing some kind of training, whether it be driver training, backing with a spotter, zone and post familiarization, looking at the ambulance equipment setup, the location and uses of stuff, doing ALS assist concepts. They should not be spending hours and hours on their cell phones or sleeping, and this is partly up to you to engage them. If they're not going to engage, even after you've discussed things with them and tried to get them involved, you need to confront them about it and say you're not engaging, and then you need to let me know immediately so that we can deal with this. Again, documentation is the key. If someone's not engaging, we have all the reason in the world to not keep them on as the employee, but we have to tell them they're not engaging and we have to have a discussion about it. It's got to be documented. Tip 3. Zone of proximal development. All right, this is a fancy education word that I don't want you to get too hung up on the words itself, but to understand what it means. It basically means this: when you're training, don't make a task so difficult that it's unattainable. So don't give somebody something to do that they're not going to be able to do on the first day of the job, because that's going to result in a frustrated learner. They can't do it. They're going to feel stupid, and it's because they don't have the capacity to do that thing yet. On the flip side, don't give them tasks and concepts that are so easy that they're boring, because this is going to frustrate them and they're going to not engage. If you're telling me to tie my shoe every day and you're having me do it over and over again, I'm probably going to stop listening to you, and I'm probably not going to be engaged in training. The zone of proximal development, or ZPD, is basically the Goldilocks zone for education. It's just right. All right, so learners should have to struggle a little bit to learn a concept, but they should be able to make that climb on their own with some encouragement. So that's where you want your trainees to be, is in that zone of proximal development. When you're setting up concepts, when you're explaining skills, when you're having them do things, start off at a spot where they have to struggle a little bit to get there, but they can achieve that, because that achievement is actually a reward for them. They've achieved it, and then you can move on from there. All right, the zone of proximal development is going to change as the learner becomes more experienced and more confident. So the first day that you show somebody the cardiac monitor, it may be just all they can do to understand how to turn it on and maybe put the stickers on and get the 4 leads on the limbs. If we start talking about 12 lead placement right off the bat and expect them to do the 12 lead on the next call, they're going to be very disappointed and very frustrated because they're not able to do that yet. But a week into training, when they've put the 4 leads on several times and you've talked to them about the 12 leads, this might be a chance for you to challenge them and then have them actually put the 12 lead cables on the patient in the proper placement. All right, you'll have to judge what they're ready for. Part of your job in training is to see where you're at. If they look like they are struggling to the point where they cannot complete tasks and concepts, maybe reel it back a little bit, but definitely challenge them. We have to give those people the challenge and the ability to work towards something so that they feel like they're getting something out of training. These are some adult learner needs, and this is the 4th tip that I'll share with you today. Lessons need to be meaningful for adult learners. Adult learners are slightly different from children in that they need to have an understanding of why we're doing this. All right? Why do we not use a throughway when going from post to post? If I just tell you to not do that, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to you. But when I explain that when you go on a throughway when traveling from post to post, you can get caught up and not be able to access calls in the areas that you're going through the way you would if you were on normal roads, that makes sense. All right, that is meaningful. That is something you can immediately apply to your work here. Why do we not drop stretcher wheels hard when we take it out of the ambulance? We talked about that. Why do we bring all the equipment into the house on every call? So it's not just, again, throwing ideas at somebody and telling them rules. We're giving them reasons why. This is something that adult learners need. They need to be able to take the things they're learning and make them applicable and use them immediately in their field. All right? So this is another reason why the FTO has to be on top of their game, because you need to know the why of things. The second adult learner need, autonomy. All right? Adult learners need to have autonomy, which means that they have to be allowed to make mistakes. They have to be allowed to get their own style. Now, I know some of you are trying to make little disciples of yourself, which is wonderful, and I know that you're all great employees. However, not everybody is just like you. Not everybody is just like me, and some people will do things differently. Part of your job in training is to watch what someone does and see if they do it differently. And if they do, is it okay to do it that way? Because it might be. Somebody might take a slightly different route to ECMC from Tonawana's, but the distance they take is the same, the time is the same, and even though it's not the route you usually take, it might be perfectly acceptable. So we don't want to be constantly criticizing somebody and making them change just for change's sake, or just because it's not the way that we do things. You can actually learn quite a bit from people if you watch the way they do things, and it's a new idea that you haven't used before. Non-critical mistakes, guys, should be addressed after the call is over. There's nothing that will stress your trainee out more than your constant badgering them with minor things. You know, put the bag over there. You should have turned left at that last light, but you can turn left up here if that was your plan. All those little things are going to stress people out. As soon as we stress people out, they stop being able to think critically. They go into fight or flight mode, their mind goes into sympathetic nervous response, and they cannot think critically. You will shut down learning if you are constantly telling people about their non-critical mistakes. So here's an example. All right, employee grabs a non-rebreather out of the bag when you've asked for a nasal cannula. All right. You look over at him or her, they're putting the mask on the patient, and you say, I just needed a nasal cannula, can you grab that please? Okay, that's all you need to do to make that there. You don't need to actually explain that to them right now in front of everybody and stress them out, just remind them that was a problem. And then after the call's over, say, hey, look, this is a non-rebreather. This is a nasal cannula. I wanted the nasal cannula on this patient because we didn't need to use non-rebreather. They didn't need high flow oxygen. If they're going to kill somebody, sure. If they're doing something absolutely wrong or inappropriate, yes, we're going to stop them immediately. But let people make the mistakes. The rule here is don't be a helicopter teacher. Don't just hover over top of them and correct everything they do, because if you don't allow them to learn on their own and be autonomous, they're never going to develop their own style and they're never going to be comfortable learning. The third thing that adult learners need is to make connections to their prior knowledge. Right? We are not getting 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds in the field, although sometimes they may act that way, but we are getting people who are at least 18 years old, usually older, who have some kind of experience from something in their life. It may not be a ton, but maybe they spent time as a store manager, maybe they've worked in a restaurant, maybe they were a pipe fitter, they've spent time in the military. Whatever the case may be, people coming into this job are adults. They have some history, and your ability and their ability to connect ideas back to the things that they know will make their learning much faster and much more comfortable for them. The other thing that does is it honors and respects the knowledge they have. They may be a brand new EMT, but maybe they spent 10 years as a pipe fitter. So that's a respectful career that they have experience in. They can probably teach you a ton of things about pipe fitting, and you can teach them a ton of things about EMS. So we respect that and we refer back to that. I like to make connections the best I can. Once I know my student, I can say something like, hey, nebulizer, you're having trouble putting this together, but think about it as a furnace with ductwork. You know, when you used to install furnaces and you had to put ductwork in, the cup is kind of where the heat comes from in the furnace, then you have to have ductwork that goes up, and there's 2 ports where that stuff comes out. And one of them is where you suck the vaporized particles in. So this makes a connection with their prior history of working on ductwork with their HVAC, for example. Adult learners need to be self-directed. To some degree, we have to allow adult learners to kind of participate in their learning plan. So talk to them a little bit about what they want to work on today. Clearly, there are competencies that we have to work with. There are things they need to know. And in our field, there may be a certain concept that they have to know right now because it's happening on a call. But if you can, between calls, allow your trainee to go over all of the core competencies, the benchmarks, and talk to them and kind of develop a plan of learning with you, that will get them more motivated and more involved because they're going to feel like they have part of that. They have to be a little bit self-directed. The flip side of this is that your trainee needs to be self-motivated. If they're sitting in the back of the ambulance not asking you questions and they're nodding when you talk to them and they're kind of tuning you out, that's, again, something I need to know about immediately. You need to talk to them about that and say, you need to participate in training, and if you're not, we need to have a discussion. And that's something we would document and talk about. So they need to be self-motivated, but allowing them to be part of the training plan will make them own it a little more and will give them some reason to be involved. So, to recap for this first volume, and thank you for listening today, we're not looking for perfection from employees. We're looking to get them minimally qualified to go out there and to start to really do the learning on their own and to head into their EMS careers. Leading by example, extremely important. They're going to do what you do, not what you say. Engage the trainee often. Talk to them, ask them questions. Provide goals that are challenging for them, but realistic. And then make those goals more challenging as the employee gets to get better at what they're doing. Respect their background and their need to be independent. Discuss this with them. Make sure that you are allowing them to have some autonomy, to make some mistakes, and to be part of that training process. Thank you for watching. There will be much more to come of these training guidelines. If you're not a Twin City employee and you're watching this somewhere else, this is my contact info. It's Sean P. Hulsman, and shulsman@tcaems.com is how you can contact me. I'm always interested in talking about EMS training, so please feel free to send me feedback if you have any. And again, thank you for watching. Best of luck to you in training, and we'll talk to you soon.